Just think about how much the world's changed, even in the last few decades.
Mhm.
Back in 1990, the estimate was, what, 155 million people living outside their home country?
Yeah, around that.
And then by 2012,
Yeah.
boom, 214 million. That's a huge jump.
A massive jump. You really do see the effects everywhere, don't you?
Absolutely. That mix of cultures, it's just much more visible in, daily life now.
It's a really significant global shift. And right in the middle of that landscape, we find this fascinating area called Diaspora Missiology.
Diaspora Missiology.
Yeah.
Okay, that definitely sounds like something we need to unpack a bit. What exactly are we going to explore today?
Well, today we're looking at how the Lausanne Movement, which is a pretty influential network in evangelical Christian circles, how they've been sort of grappling with and addressing this huge global movement of people.
Okay.
It's really about understanding how a major religious movement is adapting, evolving its thinking, because the world itself is just so much more mobile now.
Right. Now, maybe not everyone listening follows religious trends super closely. So, why should this topic grab their attention? Why should you care?
Yeah, good question. I think because understanding this diaspora missiology idea offers a really unique lens on just how much global migration affects communities, all communities.
Mhm.
It kind of shines a light on how different cultures and ideas bump up against each other, connect in new ways. And that presents some really interesting, maybe unexpected opportunities for understanding, for connection. Doesn't really matter what your personal beliefs are.
Right, so it's almost like a case study. You've got this massive global trend people moving, and we're looking at how one significant international network is, well, interpreting it and responding. So what sources are we working with for this deep dive?
Our main source today is an excerpt from a piece called Diaspora Missiology and the Lausanne Movement. Basically, it maps out the journey, the development, and the goals of this field within the Lausanne Movement.
Okay.
And we're focusing on their perspective over a specific period, roughly 1990 up to 2011.
Gotcha. So our mission here is to really dig into the core of what diaspora missiology means, at least as the Lausanne Movement saw during that time. We want to pull out the key concepts, maybe find some surprising angles on this idea of a borderless world.
Exactly. We want to get a handle on their fundamental ideas and what they see as the big implications of this super interconnected world for how we engage globally.
Okay, let's dive in then. Where do we even start to get our heads around diaspora missiology? What are the basics?
Well, the source starts by laying out some key definitions. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, foundational stuff.
So first up is just diaspora. In this context, they use it pretty broadly. It just means the dispersion, the scattering of any ethnic group away from their original homeland.
Okay, so not tied to like one specific historical event necessarily.
Exactly. Any ethnic group spreading out and living elsewhere counts as a diaspora. Simple enough.
Got it. What's the next building block then?
Next is diaspora in missions. This is more specific. It refers to people within those scattered ethnic groups who are actively involved in, well, what's often called the Great Commission.
Ah, right. The instruction to spread the faith, basically.
Precisely. So diaspora in missions means people within these dispersed groups actively sharing their beliefs. And it's not just like official missionaries. It includes pretty much anyone in a diaspora living out their faith in their new setting.
Okay, so individuals within these scattered communities taking an active role, which leads us, I guess, to the main term, diaspora missiology itself. How's that defined?
So the text points to the Lausanne Soul Declaration on diaspora missiology for a definition. It calls it a missiological framework for understanding and participating in God's redemptive mission among people living outside their place of origin.
A missiological framework. Okay, so it's more than just individual actions. It's a whole system,
Oh,
a
well,
way of thinking.
exactly. A whole system of thinking, principles, strategies for understanding and engaging in mission, specifically within the context of these dispersed populations.
Right, not just scattered efforts, but a thought-through approach responding to global migration. Now, the text also talks about a Kairos movement. That sounds significant.
Yeah, this Kairos idea is pretty interesting. In theology and missiology, Kairos refers to these sort of divinely appointed moments, windows of opportunity.
Okay.
The argument presented here is that this huge dispersion of people happening right now constitutes one of those moments. It presents totally new, unprecedented opportunities for connection, for spreading ideas, for mission.
So the sheer scale of migration isn't just a demographic fact. It's seen as potentially a pivotal moment, special time.
That's the idea. It's viewing this massive movement, even when it stems from, difficult or traumatic circumstances like displacement, viewing it through this lens of Kairos, seeing it as presenting unique possibilities. Of course, you could ask how framing displacement as opportunity sits with those actually displaced. It definitely raises questions about suffering and interpretation.
Yeah, that's a complex layer. But the core idea is that this movement itself, regardless of the drivers, is seen as having maybe a larger purpose or potential.
Exactly. And the text stresses this was a shift in perspective. It mentions figures like Ralph Winter and Bruce Koch, who apparently recognized early on that these fragments of populations now living in places that were easier to reach, well, they held strategic importance.
Even if traditional mission groups were maybe slow on the uptake.
Right. Many were slower to see it, according to the source. So the Lausanne Movement's growing focus on diaspora missiology is presented as kind of catching up to this reality, this growing awareness.
It really is a different mindset, isn't it? Moving away from the old model of we have to go there to reach those people. Now, people from there are increasingly, well, here or somewhere else accessible.
That's a crucial point the text makes. It talks about moving towards what it calls kinetic mission models.
Kinetic, like movement.
Exactly. The idea is that mission strategy needs to be less stuck on geography, less place-based, and more focused on populations that are moving, reaching people wherever they are. It's described as non-spatial, sort of borderless mission.
Borderless, that really captures it. Okay, so how did the Lausanne Movement, as this big organization, actually start to formally, get behind this idea?
Well, the source kind of traces it chronologically. It mentions some early voices within the movement, people like Tom Houston and Samuel Escobar talking about a global gospel or a migration model. They laid some groundwork.
Okay, early thinkers.
Then others, missiologists like Enoch Wan and Sideri Joytira, who actually authored this piece we're looking at, they built on that, specifically articulating these concepts of diaspora and missions and then diaspora missiology.
So these folks were really identifying this changing world and trying to build a theological and strategic framework for it. What were the key moments for the Lausanne Movement itself, organizationally?
A really big step was establishing the Diaspora Issue Group. This happened at the Lausanne Forum in Pattaya, Thailand, back in 2004.
Okay, a dedicated group.
Yeah, and this group produced a key document, Lausanne Occasional Paper 55. Its title was pretty evocative. It focused on diasporas and international students as the new people next door.
The new people next door. Wow, that really reframes how you might see your own neighborhood, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests these global connections, these opportunities, might literally be right next door, not just overseas.
Interesting.
And the text also mentions a book distributed widely at that same forum, Scattered, The Filipino Global Presence. Apparently, it used the Filipino diaspora as a major case study.
So the Filipino experience became a kind of key example for understanding this whole phenomenon.
It seems so. A really compelling example of diaspora missions in action, looking at the history, the theology, the strategy behind it.
Okay. What came next for Lausanne?
Well, in 2007, they took another important step. They appointed a senior associate for diasporas, and the first person in that role was Sideri Joytira, the author again.
So creating a specific leadership role focused just on this. That sounds like a serious commitment.
It really signaled that, yeah, taking it seriously at the leadership level.
And after that appointment?
Then in 2008, the Lausanne Diaspora's Leadership Team, or LDLT, was formed. This brought together various leaders, scholars, practitioners in this emerging field.
Okay.
And their job was basically to flesh out an evangelical theology and strategy for engaging with diasporas. This work directly led to the formal proposal of diaspora missiology as a distinct field.
So this team really solidified the ideas and pushed them forward within the movement. And that led to the Seoul Declaration you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. In November 2009, there was the Lausanne Diaspora Educators Consultation in Seoul, South Korea. And that produced the Seoul Declaration on diaspora missiology.
And what did that declaration do specifically?
It formally offered that refined definition of diaspora missiology we discussed, and crucially, it issued a call to action.
Action for whom?
For churches.
Yeah.
For mission agencies, for seminaries and universities, calling them to actively mobilize and equip what it termed diaspora kingdom workers.
Diaspora kingdom workers. That's a really potent phrase. It puts the emphasis squarely on the people within the diaspora, doesn't it?
It really does. The declaration highlighted the strategic advantages, These individuals often don't need special visas like traditional missionaries might.
Right.
They face fewer political hurdles sometimes, and they're already embedded in their host communities. The whole emphasis was on empowering them through partnerships, networks. Kingdom collaborations was the term used.
It feels like a more organic approach, leveraging the migration patterns that are already happening.
That's a good way to put it. And Lausanne kept building on this. There were more consultations in Europe, North America. Diaspora was apparently a major theme at the big Lausanne the Third Congress in Cape Town in 2010. They even had a position paper there specifically on the theology of diaspora.
So it went from being maybe a niche idea discussed by a few to being a really central part of the conversation within this global network.
Yeah.
It wasn't just talk, right? The source mentioned concrete outcomes.
Absolutely. After that Cape Town Congress in 2012, the Global Diaspora Network, or GDN, was officially established. This became a more permanent, larger organization designed to carry forward that Lausanne diaspora agenda. It basically took over from the earlier LDLT team, set up an international board headquartered in Manila.
So the GDN is now the main coordinating body for these efforts. And the source gives practical examples too, right? Diaspora Missiology in action. Can you share some?
Sure. One example mentioned is Sudanese refugees in Canada getting training in evangelism and discipleship, statistically aiming to reach out to their Canadian neighbors.
Okay.
Another one involves Filipino former nightclub workers in Japan. They're using the Jesus film as a tool to connect with people in their local Japanese communities.
Wow, very different contexts.
Very. There's also mention of partnerships in Qatar, overseas Filipino workers, Korean business people, Nepalese construction workers, all starting Bible studies together.
That really shows the cross-cultural potential within these diaspora settings.
Yeah.
And I think I remember reading something about churches at sea. That sounded wild.
Yeah, that one's fascinating. Apparently, there's a huge number of Christian seafarers, especially Filipinos. So there's this initiative to actually establish churches at sea. Organizations like Operation Mobilization and the Filipino International Network are training Filipino seafarers to be like church planters while they're working on ships.
On the ships themselves?
Yeah, ministering to their fellow crew members during long voyages. I mean, think about the challenges. Cramped spaces, maybe, the isolation people feel at sea, but also the unique opportunities. It's a really creative adaptation.
That is truly kinetic mission in action, isn't it? Taking the church, so to speak, to a constantly moving, often overlooked group.
Exactly. And the source wraps up by noting how academic institutions, seminaries and the like, are increasingly recognizing diaspora missiology as an important field of study.
Makes sense, if this is the reality.
Right. They mention specialized academic programs popping up, more doctoral dissertations focusing on it. The argument is basically, if diaspora is such a defining feature of the 21st century, then theological education has to include training in diaspora missiology.
It's about equipping the next generation of leaders, practitioners, thinkers to engage effectively with this global reality.
Precisely. The Lausanne Movement, through the GDN, wants to see this become standard practice, preparing people for this borderless world. And the source finishes by circling back to the Cape Town Commitment's call to action.
Remind us what that said.
It encouraged church leaders to see these unique opportunities in diaspora, urged Christians within diaspora groups to recognize God's potential purpose in their situation, and it challenged host communities, host nations, to extend Christ's love to immigrants.
Okay, so let's try and recap this deep dive. We started with the sheer scale of global migration, a defining trend. Then we got into key definitions. Diaspora as any dispersed ethnic group. Diaspora in missions as those groups actively sharing faith. And diaspora missiology as the whole framework for understanding and doing mission in that context.
Right. The system.
We talked about the Kairos movement idea, seeing this dispersion as a unique window of opportunity. And I shift to kinetic mission models, focusing on moving people, not just fixed places.
Yep, the borderless approach.
Then we trace the Lausanne Movement's journey. The issue group in 2004, appointing a senior associate, forming the LDLT, launching the Global Diaspora Network, GDN, the pivotal Seoul Declaration defining the field and calling for diaspora kingdom workers.
And the Cape Town Commitment reinforcing it all.
Exactly. Plus, those real-world examples, Sudis in Canada, Filipinos in Japan, the partnerships in Qatar, those fascinating churches at sea.
Don't forget the academic side, the push to get this into seminary curricula.
Right, integrating it into training. It's quite a comprehensive picture.
It really shows an evolution in thinking, doesn't it? The Lausanne Movement adapting its approach to global engagement because the globe itself is changing so rapidly.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to chew on. Thinking about how interconnected we all are now through migration.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder, how can understanding these kinds of principles about engaging across cultures in diaspora contexts, how might that offer broader insights for all of us? Regardless of personal beliefs about mission, how do we foster better understanding, better connections in our own increasingly diverse communities? In this world that feels more and more borderless, what does that mean for how we build societies, how we just interact with each other day to day?
Yeah. It definitely pushes you to think beyond just the specific religious context and consider the wider implications for everyone living in this mobile world.
Definitely something to keep thinking about.